Woods Runner, Chapter 10. This time, the sound of men coughing and axes chopping wood for the fire awakened Samuel. He opened his eyes. The pain was much less, and saw that it was daybreak. Men were moving all around him. He started to roll, but the head pain stopped him, as well as a sudden memory that he had no pants on. The bedroll was next to him where Coop had put it. He snaked his pants out, pulled them on, and fastened them with a leather cord around the waist. The pain in his head had abated. It only jabbed if he moved suddenly. The wound felt tight as if someone were pulling the top of his scalp together. When he unrolled the blanket, his rifle fell out, and he saw that the lock had dirt jammed around the flint and pan, pushing up the striker plate or frizzen so the rifle was not able to fire. The men were making fire, tying bedrolls. One man had what looked like to be a permanently bent left arm, held up at a slight angle. He was sitting on the ground, cleaning his rifle. It made Samuel feel embarrassed that his own lock was so dirty. He found his possible bags in the blanket roll. This was a pouch with the powder horn attached that hung around his neck, where he carried odds and ends of equipment for cleaning and firing his rifle. Inside, he had a tiny piece of steel wire. After blowing the dirt out of the pan and frizzen and flint, he used the wire to clear the touch hole, which fed the jet of flame from the pan into the powder charge. Then he used an oily rag to clean the whole area and put some finely ground black powder into the pan and frizzen and flint. He used the wire to clear the touch hole, which fed the jet flame from the pan to the powdery charge. I lost my place. Oh, used an oily rag. He closed the frizzen over the pan, eased the hammer to half cock, safety, and set the rifle aside. The fire had flared up as the men added wood. Samuel rose to his feet and went to the nearby bushes to relieve himself. His legs were wobbly, but seemed to work well enough. Even though he felt weak as a kitten, as one part of his body got better, another would follow. As the pain in his head went down, the hunger in his belly came up. There was an entire back leg from an ox over the fire on a metal spit. Last night, Coop had been cutting bits of it to put into Samuel's broth. Looking at it made Samuel even more ravenous. But the other men weren't eating, so he held back. One, a thin man with a scraggly beard, saw Samuel looking at the meat. He pulled a knife, really a short sword, carved off a generous piece and handed it to Samuel. You got to eat. We might walk long today, and it's going to be hard for you to keep up with your belly without your belly is full. Thank you. Samuel took the meat. It was very tough, and he sat chewing and swallowing, watching the men clear up camp. While Samuel watched the men and ate, he also rolled and tied up his bedroll, making certain the powder was dry and his possible bags was ready to go. But these men were even faster. Without speaking except a grunt and point, they seemed to get everything done with the least effort in the quickest time. The ox was yoked and tied off to a tree. The skid that Samuel had been on, which had two long tongues that went up either side of the ox and attached to the yoke, was hooked up and packed with extra equipment. The cooking pot, blankets, muskets, a small keg of powder, and another keg of whiskey, and all things, a drum left by the fleeing redcoats and Indians. These men came and stood by the fire. In silence, they cut pieces of meat and ate, drinking creek water out of a wooden bucket with a wooden dipper. Samuel still had dozens of questions, but since the men were silent as they stood staring into the fire while they chewed, he held his tongue. There were 7 men. When everybody was done eating, they each took a plug of tobacco and poked it in their cheek or lower jaw. They put the leftover meat on the skid, wrapped in a piece of green ox hide to keep the flies off, and used the bucket to fetch water from the creek to put the fire out. With no effort at all, they were moving along the trail. 2 men went well ahead, one left and one right of the trail. The rest formed a column, if 5 men could be called a column, just ahead of the ox and Samuel. In Samuel's weakened condition, there was absolutely no way he could have kept up with the men, but the ox saved him. He knew the ox tend to plod a little less than 2 miles an hour, and this ox was slower yet. Even Samuel had no trouble keeping up with him, and when his legs felt a little weak, he would move to the ox's side and hold on to the yoke, letting the ox pull him along for a time. Every hour and a half, the 2 men walking ahead would come in, and 2 others would move out. One of these cycles, Coop came back and walked near Samuel. It was what Samuel had been waiting for. You kept me alive. Thank you. It weren't much. A little tobacco and spit and tough meat. I'd have been done if you hadn't come along. Maybe, maybe not. One never knows how a wind is going to blow. Why did you all come along? Where are you going? Coop spit. The men all spit, almost all the time. Samuel had once tried tobacco, first in a clay pipe and then taking a chew, and it had made him sick as a dog. He couldn't see the sense in using it, but all these men seemed to chew all the time and spit like fountains. Maybe something happened to your taster when you got older, he thought. So you didn't mind it. We're going to gin up, Coop said, pointing east with his chin, and fight them redcoats. There'd be a feller named Morgan round about Boston City starting up Morgan's Rifles. We all shoot rifles, and we figured to give them redcoats a taste of good shooting. They got nothing but muskets, good for nothing after 50, 60 yards. Carl here, he pointed up toward his brother walking beside the head of box. He can pink a man off a horse out 200-300 yards. Ooh, yards. 300 yards, how many feet? Every time. Wouldn't even know what hit him, nor where it came from. He nodded his chin at the group. Every man here can hit a square foot piece of paper every time at 200 yards. I suppose you could too. Took a mind to it. I'm not sure about killing. You did that Indian back there, laying dead and half a bullet hole in him. I wasn't aiming. He shot, I pulled the trigger. What you gonna do when you find your mam and pap? Shake hands with them and that took him? Samuel felt like spitting too. I haven't thought that far yet. Best be thinking on it and keep your powder dry and your pan primed. Right. Thing is, I didn't even know there was anybody to fight. Who was good or bad? Which side to be on? Coop snorted. Don't take much thinking. Them that starts in on killing people for no reason, them that comes and takes your folks with a rope around their necks, they're the bad ones. Your good people don't do that. What reason? Samuel stumbled on a rock. To his surprise, the ox was aware of it and hesitated to let him catch up. Why did those British redcoats and Indians attack us like that? There was no reason. We weren't against the crown or rebels or anything. Coop spit, neatly taking a fly off the ox's ear. He snorted. Redcoats doing it because they're redcoats and ain't worth a tinker's dam. Following orders. Indians doing it because they was hired to do it. They's Iroquois. Most of them work for the English. Always have, always will. Ever since the French War. They get all the plunder they can carry and scout money from the redcoats. Heard there's a man named Hamlin, some kind of redcoat officer, buys as many scalps as they call him. Hair buying Hamlin. What I don't understand is why they took your folks instead of killing. Oh, look, the front line is a-coming. The column stopped by a clear water creek and everybody drank. Then the men took the meat off the drag and sat in a circle, cutting pieces and chewing. At first, Samuel hung back, but Carl motioned him to the squat and eat. Samuel was feeling stronger by the minute, and the meat heated him like fire. No one talked much except for Coop, and when they finished, they rose, took a chew of tobacco, and set off. Coop and another man went ahead. Samuel walked in silence, hanging on the wooden shaft tied to the ox. It was mid-morning and the sun fell through the trees on either side of the trail, so they seemed to be walking in a lighted green tunnel. Now and then, insects caught sunlight and flashed white like small lamps. Any other time, Samuel would have been taken by the beauty of it. But now he couldn't stop thinking of what Coop had started to say. Why hadn't the raiders killed his parents? And would they do it now? I'm way behind them, he thought. 6, maybe 7 days, dragging along with an ox. God only knows what's happening to them. I have to go faster. All right, communication. The Hessians. It's a great word. Try to say it. Hessian. The British also used mercenary soldiers, issued with the same brown bess muskets and bayonets. A mercenary is a soldier for hire. Most of them were troops from Germany called Hessians. While they were relatively effective as combat soldiers, they brought with them such a savage, atrocious behavior and committed war crimes so far outside civilized behavior, bayoneting unarmed captive soldiers who had surrendered, farmers, women, including pregnant women, children, and even infants, that they had become known as little more than beasts and were treated in kind. All right, so this is not just one person, this is a group. They become a huge part of the Revolutionary War. All right, guys, that was chapter 10.